Okay, I'm going to warn you right now. This episode's going to be a bit of a mess. Because, as with a lot of things in Evangelion, there's contradictory information, the interviews, the episode, the extended material. None of it's particularly clear, and a lot of it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, as with the Angel's motivations, I'm going to mix canon, my own impressions, and try to make a coherent narrative that makes sense, as opposed to sticking 100% with the evidence on screen. So I suppose let's start with Kaworu because he was born first. So as I've said, Sele found Adam imprisoned within Antarctica. Now the exact identity of Adam I'm not sure of. I know for certain he's not the biblical Adam. I had a couple speculations in my other video. Maybe he was the leader of the Watchers. Maybe he was like the first angel to fall to Earth. As I said, there's kind of a difference between the Watchers and the demons. The Watchers didn't follow Satan. They instead came to Earth to breed with human women. So they aren't evil per se, but they aren't loyalist angels per se. I mean, there's different interpretations. Some say that there's different types of Watchers. There's evil, neutral, and I guess you could say loyalist Watchers. There's also an impression that they're just kind of a neutral force. Like there's good angels, there's evil angels who are demons, and there's neutral angels who taught humanity science and art and how to build cities and that kind of thing. Probably my favorite portrayal of them is in Noah, as a group of angels that fell but weren't evil and gave humanity, like I said, technology and culture and stuff, and ultimately are redeemed at the end of the film because they've kind of learned the error of their ways. But so is Adam the leader of the Watchers, etc.? I don't think he's a Nephilim. I don't think he's a half human, half god, or half human, half angel, and he's obviously not entirely human. My personal view is that the angels are all Watchers. They're all fallen angels. For whatever reason, they lack the fruit of knowledge, so they lack intentionality, that sort of thing. Free will. They don't have rational souls. They're basically just creatures of instinct. Once again, whether or not they possessed it at some point, whether or not they lost it. So basically, sorry I'm going back over stuff, but it's important because it's important to the context of this. My view is that the Watchers kind of ruled the Earth, and they were breeding with human women, and in breeding with human women, they were able to create the race of Nephilim, which are half angels, half humans. And that race was so frightening because they possessed both the fruit of knowledge, which is what man ate in the garden that gave him a rational soul, and I know that's not the exact theology, but you get what I mean, and the fruit of life, which meant they were immortal. And God was afraid of this because humans weren't meant to be all-powerful like that, and so he sent the great flood to destroy them all. And because the angels were immortal, my view is that the great flood swept them all to Antarctica and froze them. And prior to that, them being sealed there, their offspring in them were the old gods, as it were. So that is the origin of the angels, and that's the origin of Adam. Now, Lilith is, in biblical folklore, the first woman created. She was created before Eve, but she would not subjugate herself to Adam, and so she went on to become a demon. So my view is that Lilith-based life, and I don't think Lilith actually created humanity, but it's kind of metaphorical from the sense that she was a human. So Lilith-based life, or Lilith life, possesses the fruit of knowledge. So Unit 1 has the fruit of knowledge inherently, which is, I guess, why I think it's stronger than the Adam-based ones. We'll get into that in a minute. But Lilith was a human who ascended by becoming a demon or a Nephilim or some kind of higher being. And my belief is that she's inherently attractive to the angels. And they're just blindly trying to reach her and breed with her because whatever happened to them, they've lost their higher brain functions. And all they have left is their instinctual desire to mate with a human. particularly an ascended human. Perhaps they kind of remember her from the previous era. I don't know, it's not entirely clear. Anno himself said some of the angels were trying to get to Lilith, some were trying to save Adam, some had no particular motivation. So we don't know. My general belief is either the angels were trying to get to Lilith to breed with her, or they were trying to reach Adam and release him. So my kind of view is, yeah, that they were trying to get there, and if they had emerged with Lilith, it would have created a super being that possessed both fruits and thus became God. And in Evangelion, God with a lowercase g is a being that possesses both fruits, as it's able to grow and change and evolve as per the fruit of knowledge, but it also possesses infinite energy and an ability to live forever, stay young, and regenerate itself, as comes from the S2 organ, or the fruit of life. So sorry I had to go back over that again, but it's important in understanding this. So second impact was caused when they woke up Adam. They presumably dug him out of the ice, and he began to ascend. He began to unfurl his wings and go to his full power. And the strength of that melted large amounts of Antarctica and caused a global flood. So what they were able to do is pierce Adam with the lance of Longinus, and that was able to reduce him to a dormant shape. Now, there's another question as to why the lance didn't kill him straight out, because the lance's purpose is it can kill any living being in one shot. Maybe they only partially penetrated him, maybe they used it in a special way. I don't know, it's not really clearly established. But what the lance wound up doing was it reduced Adam to an embryonic state, as well as separating his soul. Now, kind of one of the big issues when we're talking with metaphysics is what does spirit mean and what does soul mean? Because they mean different things to different people. Because traditionally, as in per Platonism and kind of classical theology, a person consists of three parts: a body, a spirit, and a soul. The body is straightforward. Spirit and soul is where it gets confusing. Generally speaking, the two parts are considered to be the consciousness, which is the personality, the persona. Ghosts are beings that lack bodies but have a consciousness, or have both a spirit and a soul. And angels are kind of similar in that regard. They don't have a physical presence, but they possess the other two things. So there's the consciousness and kind of self-identity, but then there's also the abstract portion of someone, which is it's similar to God the Father, as the body and the personality proceed from the abstract. So in some cases, kind of the abstract, the Platonic form that's unchanging and indestructible is called the spirit, and in some cases it's called the soul. And this is very confusing. In Evangelion, the soul is the persona. It's the personality. It's not necessarily the immortal part of a person per se, but it is their consciousness. So Adam's soul was separated from his body and was created as a human, or put into a human form, and that's where we get Kaworu. And the process appears to have taken his memory away. The nature of memory is very confusing. There's different theories depending on your theological and scientific belief. Some people believe it to be a non-physical thing residing in the spirit or the soul, which is kind of the middle ground between the physical and the abstract. So some people put it there. Some people say it's biological and it rests within the mind. I guess in this case you could maybe argue that it's biological, and Kaworu lost most of his memories. Then again, we also kind of have a religious precedent for something a bit like this with Jesus. Now, Jesus was God, so he was omniscient, but he was also a man, and thus his intellect was limited. So my understanding with how Jesus worked, and I've talked to a theologian about this, is Jesus willingly limited his memory. So he had a passive and an active memory. So his passive memory was infinite, but in practice he didn't use it. He restricted himself to what he could learn actively, if that makes sense. So there are times where in the Bible where Christ will look into it and start lecturing people and start kind of revealing these deeper truths and things that he shouldn't otherwise know. But in practice, he limited his memory. So perhaps that happened with Kaworu, where he has this passive memory of everything that happened while he was Adam, but he willingly limits himself. Perhaps he acts. It's not entirely clear. He seems very aware that he's not really a human per se, but he also seems to lack a lot of kind of understanding of how the world works. So who really knows? So they used the Lance of Longinus to separate Adam's soul from his body, and it was used to create Kaworu. Now, Kaworu's birthday is the same day as Second Impact. Now, how he was created, we have absolutely no idea. Was he a clone of Adam? Because Adam kind of looks a bit like a human fetus. So is he a direct clone of Adam? Did the body just kind of generate itself when the soul became independent? Did they place him within an embryo? Did they place him within an existing human? Is he like Rey and he's kind of a chimera or a hybrid of angel and human DNA? We really have absolutely no idea. What we do know is Kaworu possessed both the fruit of knowledge and the fruit of life. The fruit of knowledge is, I would just call the brain. Because angels have the S2 organ, which is their core, and it's kind of a physical organ. My guess is they don't have brains, and the brain is the physical organ that corresponds to the fruit of knowledge. So as being a human-angel hybrid, Kaworu possesses both. Presumably he has an S2 organ somewhere within him because of his abilities, such as levitating, require the infinite energy one of them generates. So however he came about, he possessed both. And thus Kaworu is, in my opinion, the most powerful being to exist in the Eva universe, as he was able to take control of an Eva without really concentrating. He was able to achieve whatever sync ratio he wanted. His AT field was so powerful, he was able to shut down the fundamental forces of nature. He could block out light. He could shut down magnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces, and can control gravity. Ultimately, it's kind of implied Kaworu could do absolutely anything that he wanted, and that his death was entirely based on his own decision to die. So, what kind of happened between Kaworu's appearance in 24 and his birth is entirely unknown. Given the fact that he was apparently loyal to Sele and had a past with them, it's expected that, to a certain extent, Sele dealt with his being raised. Now, was he raised in a similar method to Rey in a facility with no real contact with the outside world? Was he raised in kind of a more normal way? Was there kind of a mixture of the two? Was he indoctrinated? Did Chairman Keel raise him personally? We have all these strange kind of contradictory ideas. The truth of the matter is we unfortunately really have no idea. All we know is that he was born from Adam and he died at the hands of Shinji 14 years later. And that's about it with regards to Kaworu. So, his actual agenda is similarly ambiguous. Because, as you can see in the deleted scene of episode 24, he is aware that he is Adam's salvaged soul. He is aware that his body has been placed within Gendo, but he's not particularly interested in reaching his body again. So, had Sele told him, because in episode 24, Sele tells him that they've decided to side with the angels, and that humanity's evil, and that they want to return to a world ruled by the old gods. And presumably either humanity will be re-enslaved, will breed with the angels to create a new super race, or will be completely exterminated. We don't really know. None of this is really conclusively established. Clearly, Kaworu, to a certain extent, betrayed Sele, or had Sele intended for him to die the whole time. I mean, he's kind of viewed as Sele's ace, so had he been sent there to trigger Third Impact, had Sele kept him in reserve to kill Gendo and destroy Nerve in case everything failed? had they had him so that they could trigger third impact whenever they wanted. So whenever the last angel was defeated, the second last angel was defeated, whenever Armesiel died, if they could wait until the Eva series was ready, until they were ready to destroy Nerve, and then they could send him and let him die, and then they could trigger the final phase of their plan. We don't really know, because apparently Kaworu doesn't... Sele wanted Unit 1 to destroy him, so we don't know if he decided to betray them, what his actual motivation was. Similarly, I think there's some question marks regarding his relationship with Shinji. Did he actually care about Shinji? Because some people argue that he's a satanic figure and that his method of destroying his target is to get close to them, to build up that rapport, and then to let them kill him. Because he was able to defeat Shinji in a way that no other being did. Keep in mind, Shinji was the only Eva pilot who lasted until the end of the series. When Kaworu descended to Terminal Dogma, he was the only operational pilot left to pursue him. None of the other beings had managed to defeat him. Even Zeruel, when he had gone to 400% and merged with the Eva temporarily, and Liliel, when he absorbed into a second dimension, neither of them was able to defeat him. But Shinji was reduced to a comatose state after Kaworu. The Messiah of humanity had been brought low by Kaworu. There's also the question, as powerful as Kaworu is, could he have beaten Shinji in Unit 1 with an S2 organ had they fought for real? We don't really know the answer to any of these things, but I think we're fairly safe to say is that ultimately, whatever the revelation Kaworu came to, he realized that his people, the angels, time was over. That they didn't have a purpose or intentionality or really meaning in their existence, but humans, whatever their many flaws, did. I think, as I said, you can see this in how he viewed music as such a great thing, that the culture of humans, their ability to create, to constantly reach for the future and change, made them inherently more worthwhile than his people, which by this point in time existed purely on instinct. Ultimately, I think he came to view Shinji as, if not the Messiah per se, then a representation of humanity in general, of the goodness of humanity, its compassion, its ability to love, its ability to grow, its ability to care, but also of the anxieties of humanity. Shinji had been exposed both to love and to hate, to jealousy, to betrayal, to pain and death, and the ultimate revelation. That's a reference to the end to Evangelion trailer, by the way. So he kind of viewed Shinji as undergoing the suffering of the sins of humanity, but also what was the most, how would you put it, noble in humanity. So he figured that Shinji, more than just about anyone else, was in a position to judge whether or not the world was worth saving. And ultimately, when Third Impact occurred through the forbidden union of Adam and Lilith, he, along with Rey, decided to give Shinji the choice as to whether or not humanity would be saved or humanity would be destroyed. So much as with Christ, Shinji took in all the hopes and dreams, all the sins and pain of humanity, and made his decision as to whether or not it was worthy of salvation. And ultimately, Shinji made his decision to save humanity much as Jesus did. Now we come to Rey, and her story is quite similar. When Nerve was able to find Lilith buried in Tokyo, wherever Tokyo 3 was built, in the Black Moon. So Lilith, as I said, I believe the red and black moons were, the white and black moons were, or is it white and red? It doesn't really matter. Were imprisoned there following God destroying the world during the first impact. So whether Lilith was found there prior to second impact or afterwards, it's not clearly established. We know Gendo wasn't at the South Pole when the Katsuragi expedition was there. So perhaps they discovered Lilith, perhaps they didn't. We don't know how aware Sele was. All we know is that sometime shortly after Second Impact, Unit 1 was created. Now, we do know more than any other unit the origin of Unit 1, and I'm going to show you a picture. Unit 1 was grown from Lilith. Basically, what they did was they cut Lilith in half, and they used her lower body to grow Unit 1. That's why Lilith's lower body has been bisected. And Unit 1 is consistently shown to be the strongest Eva. My guess is because it's the pure copy of Lilith as opposed to the other Evas, which are imperfect copies of Adam. Because the other Evas, despite having characteristics of the Fruit of Life, lack the Fruit of Life. They don't have S2 organs. But Unit 1 possessing a full soul, Yui's full soul, and being directly built from Lilith, possesses the fullness of the Fruit of Knowledge, and thus is superior for possessing all of one as opposed to part of one. They refer to Eva as the man that was like God itself. So, where did Rey come from? This is an interesting question. The canon explanation is when Yui was absorbed, they conducted a salvage operation and tried to rebuild her, and Rey was the product of that. So when they tried to take Yui out of Unit 1, what wound up coming out was Rey, which was a mixture of Yui and Lilith's DNA, Lilith being because of Unit 1 is grown from Lilith. Now, my thought process is somewhat different, and I don't think there's any canon evidence other than maybe the timeline for this, but I think it makes more sense. What if Rey preceded Yui's absorption into Unit 1? Because Lilith was obviously dormant or had her soul removed because they were able to cut her in half and grow Unit 1 out of her. So what if Rey was built around the same time as Kaworu? What if Yui willingly donated her genetic material and mixed it with some of Lilith's, and they grew Rey in a tank, and then they extracted Lilith's soul and placed it within her? I think that's certainly a possibility, and I kind of lean towards the idea that Yui was more involved with the project than people really give her credit for. Because she comes across as being kind of this idealized, saintly-like woman, but you have to understand we're dealing with unreliable narrators here. Both Shinji and Gendo idealize her, as does Fuyusuke, so everybody who's alive who remembers her is deeply loves her and has kind of an idealized version of her that's grown more prominent over time. We do know that Yui was the daughter of a member of Seele and was heavily involved with it before Gendo married her. I like to believe that she's the daughter of Chairman Keel, and Chairman Keel is Shinji's grandfather, largely because he's the only named member of Seele, and it would just kind of be, it's like poetry, it rhymes, kind of like how Yoda trained Dooku, Dooku trained Qui-Gon Jinn trained Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan trained Anakin and Luke. You kind of have this logical progression. So I think it's quite possible that Yui was involved with Rey's creation and that Rey was already a baby by the time the whole incident happened. Perhaps Gendo only decided to raise her personally after the incident, and Rey had lived in that room prior to that. We don't really know. I mean, like I said, it's pretty much canon that Rey was created afterwards, but I think it's more interesting and creates a better narrative if we believe that Rey was made beforehand. Regardless, Rey has been isolated pretty much entire life and has developed a severely schizoid personality with no ability to relate to anyone. Now, Rey possesses obviously Lilith's soul. This is confirmed on numerous occasions. Unlike Kaworu, it seems though that she possesses a lack of awareness as to who and what she is. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. One, it's fairly clear that Lilith's soul exists in several pieces. Part of it was in Unit 1. Part of it was in Unit 0. Part of it remained within her body. As an end to Evangelion, Rey says to Lilith, "I'm home," and Lilith responds, "Welcome home." Perhaps part of the soul also exists within the various clones. And who knows, perhaps part of it moves around because Rey dies a number of times and the soul keeps being transferred. So my guess is Lilith's fragmented soul is part of the reason why Rey just behaves in a very strange manner. Because Kaworu behaves in a weird manner, but he seems like a full being, just a full non-human being, whereas Rey just seems completely fragmented. So whether or not Rey possesses an S2 organ, I tend to doubt it, as she dies fairly easily. If she possessed one, then Dr. Akagi wouldn't have been able to strangle her. She would have just regenerated from it. So Rey doesn't seem to possess it. My thought process is she's there so Gendo can trigger third impact. She's the trump card of Nerve, much as Kaworu is the trump card of Seele. Also to just prevent Lilith from reawakening for the duration of her soul being bound to it. So Lilith, I think, as I said, possesses a much more fragmented and confused personality than Adam does. Ultimately, though, interestingly, like Adam, she comes to view Shinji as perhaps the greatest of her children, and similarly kind of views him as representing the best and worst of humanity, its achievements and its pain. And much like him, she decides to give him the final choice as to what the ultimate fate of man will be in the movie End to Evangelion. So as to why Rey is so inept at piloting, I don't know. And the other question is, why does Unit 0 hate her so much and try to destroy her? It's another question. I don't know if it really has an answer. Or does Unit 0 try to destroy her or try to kill Gendo? Because if it tried to kill Gendo, it could be that there's a deep resentment within that part of Lilith's soul. That, well, she was chopped in half, and half of her was used to make Unit 1, and Gendo removed her soul and put it in the half-cloned body of her, of his wife. But regardless, I think it's fairly safe to say Rey is largely there simply to be the carrier from Lilith's soul and to keep her unconscious until the time they choose to initiate third impact. There probably isn't much more to her purpose than that. Gendo seems to have a certain degree of emotional attachment to her, probably because she's the last remaining physical representation of his wife. Once again, we don't necessarily know Gendo or Yui's motivations. We don't know necessarily if it was planned for Yui to be absorbed by Unit 1, how much she was involved with the whole plan for third impact, and what she wanted the ultimate outcome to be. Because as I said, she could be lying, and Shinji and Gendo are both unreliable narrators with regards to her, and we see the series from more their perspective, and we never really see it from her perspective. So ultimately, like I said, once Adam and Lilith recombine and presumably they regain their past memories, they both agree on one thing, and probably one thing only, that humanity has some value, but ultimately, due to their affection for Shinji, they're willing to give him the choice as to what happens. So hopefully I kind of explained it. It's very complicated. It doesn't necessarily make sense. And I'm trying to pull a bunch of different sources together to try to craft a coherent narrative. Anyways, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you